How am I doing so far? Everybody had a thumbs up. I like that. Lunch was good. I was in the kitchen cooking, so I'm glad you liked that. Okay, so we spent some time looking at the phone. We spent some time looking at Visual Studio. Now we're going to spend some time looking at Silverlight, which we saw very briefly earlier. We're going to get into a little bit more detail. How many people are already doing Silverlight today? Okay, let's try the other way. How many people are not doing Silverlight today? Okay, how many people have no idea what Silverlight is? Okay. All right, so Silverlight is pretty important, so we're going to spend a lot of time on it. About an hour, I hope. Although at this point, I think we're about 3 hours late. So we may stop around midnight. You guys will stop. You guys will let me know when it's time to stop. These are the topics we're going to cover. Let's just jump right into it and talk first about not Silverlight, but the design behind the phone. One of the things that you saw earlier today is that the design of Windows Phone is not like anything you've probably ever seen before. It's certainly not something you can compare to our competitors. We basically wiped the whiteboard clean and started from scratch. And one of the inspirations for the design of the phone is what you see on the screen here, is signs around the world. As you walk around a train station, at the street, airport, when you're driving your car, you look at signs, and one of the things you'll see is that there's a lot of text in signs. Not as much icons as there is text. And so you'll see Metro, for instance, which is what we refer to as the design of Windows Phone. Metro is very textual, text-heavy, if you will. You can be Metro-textual. I wasn't sure if you guys were going to laugh at that one or not. Some people were groaning, sorry. So it's very simple, it's minimalist, the design is very crisp and clean, alignment and all of those things are quite important. I don't think there's any designers in the room, I don't see any tattoos or pierced body parts, but what's that? I did that joke earlier, is that what you're saying? Sorry. You guys are a tough audience. So it's true what they say about Danes. So anyway, so one of the things you'll see is the design, is the inspiration behind the design is that text, and you'll see that. And Silverlight, in fact, is quite good at doing that. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about design. In fact, there's a whole other track on it. There is actually a really good document, the User Experience Design Guidelines. Even as developers, I would suggest that you have a look at that. It will give you really good insight into some of the things that you need to do as a developer. And so there's a URL there. Again, don't try and write it down. If you are interested in this, please email me and I'll send you this. And in fact, I think we're going to make these slides available. I haven't been able to find Martin at lunch, but we will find out if there's a way that you can download slides so you don't have to take so many notes and so on. You can actually listen and do that. So there are some tools that we saw earlier. I mentioned Expression Blend. There are tools the same way we've spent some time with Visual Studio, which is clearly a tool for developers. We also have tools for designers, and Expression Blend is the perfect tool for that. We're going to spend some time with that, just a very small amount of time later today. But again, even as a developer, you'll find that Expression Blend is quite useful. We've already seen Metro templates and components. I'm not going to spend any time on it, but you'll find that there are many different types of Windows Phone applications. And for each one of those types, we've tried to give you a template so that you don't have to start from scratch, that your designs will adhere and for the most part will appear as if they are native apps. And that's really the goal for us, is to make sure that your apps look like our apps. These are the three primary types of apps that you'll see in Windows Phone. The first one is the one that we saw earlier today, which was just a simple page. And by that, you basically have one page, and it is what it is, right? It's a very simple design. The other two are quite unique to Windows Phone. The first one is what we refer to as a pivot application. And in this case, it has a list of text and so on. It doesn't have to. It can have graphics and so on. But the idea here is that you have multiple lists and different tabs. So here you have a first tab, which is the one that's active right now. You can tell this first is a little brighter. and then you have second, and you can have 3, 4, probably up to about 5 before it starts to get a little unwieldy. But it's a really good way to present information to the end user in different ways, the same sort of information in different ways. So for instance, if you remember, I showed you Outlook. Outlook uses a pivot control on the phone, and typically when you go into your inbox, you're looking at all of your inbox, but you can pivot and look at just my urgent messages, or just my unread messages, or just, there's different pivots that you can do on that. And you just do that by either tapping on the second, in this case, the tab, or just by swiping. That's really good. Then the other one is the panorama. This is a really unique experience, and the uniqueness of it, in my mind, what we're trying to do is try to make the end user feel like the screen is bigger than it really is. And we do that by allowing them to kind of swipe, and as they swipe, they're kind of panning and scrolling and panning and making that appear. It just feels bigger. Just the device just feels bigger when you're using a panorama display. I like to think of it as sort of almost like a portal into your application. You shouldn't try and put everything into a panorama. It should act almost like if you were a magazine. The panorama would be your front page of your magazine. You're not going to have everything on your panorama, but it's the beautiful thing that's going to attract your end users. It's the one that they're going to see first. It's the one that's going to send them in different directions into your application. So it's quite interesting, quite unique, and there are no other applications or other platforms that do that. Sorry, I'll try not to cough into the microphone. So as you look at Silverlight applications, there are different display elements on the application. And you saw my sophisticated app earlier. If we look at the different things that were in that app, we had the title. This is the application title, which was adding machine, if you can't see it in the back. Then you have the page title, which is add, in this case. You have a couple of text boxes. We have a text block, which in this case is the plus sign. We also have another text block here, which is the result. And then we have a button, right? Those are different elements within that. And there's this fairly sophisticated hierarchy within Silverlight that allows you to take advantage of pretty much anything you could imagine wanting to do on the screen. And so all of those things derive from a hierarchy. It's extensible. You can build your own controls, or you can composite different types of controls. It's really easy to build components as part of your application if you need special components that perhaps are not part of the standard component set in the toolbox. The elements that we saw in the adding machine, I think we talked about this, but one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that all of those elements sort of combine. Visually, you're looking at them on this representation of a Windows Phone screen. Behind the scenes, we're maintaining that in what we refer to as a XAML page or a XAML document. And that XAML has very specific requirements, and it's strictly enforced behind the scenes by Visual Studio, or Expression Blend for that matter. And so here you're seeing snippets of XAML code for that adding machine. And obviously it's not complete, the 3 dots. We've clipped some things out just for simplicity. If we look at each of these in turn, there's a layout control. In this case, we're using a grid container that we're using to lay out the different elements on the screen. For those of you that have done Silverlight or WPF, it's identical in sort of inspiration and usage, actually. And so here you can see the grid control. We give it a name so that we can refer to it within the code. And then you can change different things. In this case, we have different rows. We have different margins around the grid, and all of those different properties are things that you take advantage of. And then within that grid control, we have multiple elements, right? So that grid control encompasses the entire content area of my adding machine. And so here I have my text box, which has all sorts of other properties, right? The height of the text box, the horizontal alignment, the name of it so that we can refer to it in code, and so on. Same thing with the button. The button is a little different in that it has a click event, and by specifying a click event, we now have the code behind. This is the event handler for that click, so that whenever the end user clicks on that click button, they will go, yeah, there's the click button, they will go and see an event handler. We saw this earlier, that the event handler does a number of things, right, adding and then posting it to the screen. Any questions on that? Let's have a quick look at that. And actually, you know what? I think I actually did a lot of this in the earlier session. So does anyone have a strong urge to see the adding machine again? No, I didn't think so. Let's skip this one because I think I actually did all of the different things, and I'm just going to do them again and bore you. Let's just keep going.
I have a question.
Yes, of course.
In these predefined components that you're using, the toolbox, do you have a chart component or a table component?
Do you have a what?
A chart.
Charting?
Yeah.
There isn't in the standard controls.
Yeah.
I was going to mention this later. There are some bonus controls, if you will, that we've actually open sourced, and I'll refer to them later, and I'll give you the link. It's called the Silverlight Toolkit, and it's available online, open source, free download, and so on. There's two components that every developer should be using if you're on Visual Studio. One of them is NuGet, which allows you to basically grab components from places like Codeplex, and the other one is Silverlight Toolkit. If you're building on Windows Phone, you save yourself a lot of time and effort, not just for charting, but there's all sorts of other cool components that are part of that, things like animation, progress controls, and so on. Any other questions?
This NuGet you mentioned, is that also the unit test?
NuGet is not about unit, sorry, the question was, is NuGet about unit testing? And it's not. Actually, NuGet is basically a package manager that allows you to manage the different components that you have on your machine, on your development machine. Keyboard uses. So this is just a tip. It's a best practice. You'll notice that the end user here is typing 2 + 2, and then how do you hit the OK button, right? How do you hit the equals button? And so in general, as a best practice, if you can, and if there's only one button, you want to try and make sure that that button is available so that the end user doesn't have to move things around to get to it, right? So in this case, maybe this could have been squeezed together so that that equals sign could have been hit there, so that I can just type 2, 2, and then hit the button, right? So that's just a best practice that you should try and do whenever possible. And then maybe
also have numbers instead of...
Yeah, that's a good point. We're actually going to see that in a second. So it's a good point in that you're typing 2, but in fact, there's no 2 on the default keyboard. And we'll see that's called an input scope, and we'll see that in a couple of minutes. This kind of thing is interesting here, but this is not a common scenario. The scenario where I see this very often is in login screens, where you have just a username and password, and then the OK button is behind the SIP. It's really annoying for the end user to have to do that. So try and push those together and make the login or cancel or whatever buttons available above the SIP. Is there a question? No. All right, let's keep going. The other thing, we talked about this earlier, showing the emulator. You can change orientation, of course, and just like you can do it on the emulator, naturally you can do it on the device. And the way you do that in code, you tell Silverlight what orientations your application will support. And so you can support either portrait or landscape or both. It's pretty straightforward. It's one property that you set. We'll see that in a couple seconds. And by doing that, you can basically define what you support. And so if you only say portrait and then you turn your application, then your application won't support landscape, right? So in most cases, you want to try and support landscape if it makes sense. Or in some cases, for instance, games, for instance, you will only support landscape just because it's much easier to hold the device and play a game when you're in landscape mode. We talked about earlier, I showed you that there was the concept of a grid container or layout. Another one that's really handy is the content panel. Sorry, the stack panel. And the stack panel is really handy in that it pretty much rearranges your text and your components that you have within the stack panel to take advantage of whatever screen real estate you have. And so what's really handy is when you're changing orientation. Your stack panel will make things like your text box will grow and move around, and it just makes your application much easier. And it will all do that. It will do that for you sort of automatically. You don't have to do anything. Now, of course, you can handle orientation changes if you want to move things around or hide things depending on the orientation. You can do that, but in many cases, the stack panel will get you quite far along the way. All right, so let's actually see how that works. So this is the exact same solution, our sophisticated app. And let me just run it. Actually, before I run it. Too late. Let's just see what's going on behind the scenes. So if I look at main page.xaml, so this is the actual XAML code. Now I have a really high font size and a small screen space, so we're going to have to move things around. But one of the things that we talked about was supported orientations, right? And so here you see that as part of defining my phone application page, I have set, where is it? Here it is. Supported orientation for this page is portrait or landscape, right? And so by doing that, then the device knows when you change orientation that it's going to allow things to move around. And then the other thing that's important is, actually, you'll notice earlier we had a grid control, and now we have a stack panel, right? And as I said, the stack panel will handle a lot of the code for that orientation change. And then in the code, you notice there's nothing there, but it's possible that we could handle that orientation code. So for instance, if I have a portrait orientation, my screen width is very narrow, and yet when I change it, my screen width is wider, and so I may want to add things. So for instance, I may want to add a chart on the side of the screen, but only when it's in landscape mode. And so this is what this event would be handled, right? So if your phone application page orientation changed event triggers, you can pretty much do anything you want there. So the same way we've been doing XAML in the designer, in the main page.xaml page or in the designer, you can do all of the same stuff that you do in the designer in code. And it's actually pretty trivial to do. So you get all of that power. So actually, you know what? Let's just put a breakpoint there and we'll see what happens. Oh, actually, I have to be running before you can hit a breakpoint. There it is. Okay, and so here's my app. And if I change orientation, nothing happens. And why is that? This is a trick that I learned, and that is that when you're using the physical keyboard, the orientation doesn't trigger because it just assumes you have a keyboard, and so it doesn't trigger. So I remember I hit the page up key to dismiss the SIP. So now if I put it back and do that, there's that trigger that we just set, right? So here's where I could now do some stuff on screen, move some stuff around, add some components on the screen or make them visible, and then now I have my app, right? And now I can do pretty much anything I want. That's really all there is to orientation change. It's really, really easy to handle. Any questions on that? Okay, let's keep going. Is this too trivial?
One question. Well, what would you do in your sample if you want to do like two different elements based on the rotation?
Two different elements?
Different elements. Say you want to hide an element, or you want to change like specific properties of that element.
Yeah, you can either collapse or make the element invisible depending on what you wanted to do.
Would you do that in the code behind, or is there a property in SAML where you can set?
I would do it in the code behind it. Yeah, I would do it in the code. That's the only way to do it, actually, because you have to have, that's the only way to do it. And do it in the code behind it, on that orientation changed event handler. Yes?
The event that fired, I didn't actually see the subscription. Is it an auto event or
Sorry?
this event that fires their
Yep.
phone application page origin?
So let me just go back to the main page and you'll vote no on that.
Oh, it's in the cell.
It's in the XAML,
Okay, yeah, thanks.
right? So it's on the phone application page. If we look at the events related to the phone application page, somewhere down here is the orientation changed event handler. Okay? And that was done previously, just to save time. Any other questions? Sorry, if am I going too fast? You guys need to let me know if I'm going too fast. Am I going too slow? Yes. Yes? Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. That's not good. So someone asked earlier, well, what happens if I enter text, right? Instead of entering the number 1 or 2, I actually type TWO. And this is how you would handle exceptions, right? It's a try-catch block so that everything in this try area, if there's any exception here, it will be caught and it will just show invalid number. Is this simple? I'm having trouble. Is there anyone that doesn't get this stuff? Is this new to anybody? Should I be going faster? Okay. Okay. We're going to, the other one is input scope. This is, someone else asked about this earlier. Because this is a number, why should you ask the end user to type letters, right? So if you remember, the keyboard that we saw earlier was standard SIP. And so by just changing the input scope on the text box, telling it input scope, this is a number, Windows Phone will just take care of, when it pops up the SIP, it will give you a SIP that has just numbers. And you have different, there's many, many different types of input scopes, things like email addresses, things like web addresses. There's a whole slew of them, and you can take advantage of that. Yes?
Make your own input scope.
You can't make your own SIP, no. No. I think there was another question here. Yeah.
Is there a sort of like a number input scope where we also have an operator so you can put minus numbers and negative numbers?
So you kind of can. I think you can. So the question was, is there an input scope where you can have negative numbers? And let me just run this. Oops. So see here, my input scope now has changed. I think if I, so this is a trick. So for those of you that may not have noticed this before, it's kind of interesting in that sometimes some of the keys, where it's appropriate, you can put tap and hold, right? So for instance, in some countries, the decimal is between thousands, right? As opposed to, and you might have a comma before your decimals. And so you need to take advantage of that. And so basically, if you tap and hold on some of these, you'll see that there's actually kind of some special characters that are sort of hidden behind the scenes. You also see this, for instance, in .com. You know, in the SIP for a web address or an email address. If you tap and hold on .com, you'll see .com, .edu, .org, what is it for Denmark? DK?
Yeah.
You'll see .dk there as well. So it's kind of handy. So take advantage of that. There you go, just a tip. Does anyone need to see this demo? I don't think so, right? Let's keep going. So that's the one we just saw. Any questions on that stuff? Let's keep going. So you may have noticed there's some interesting areas on the screen that you sometimes have access to and sometimes have control over. The two ones that are kind of important is the one at the very top of the screen, which is the system tray. And so let me just bring the emulator up. That's probably the easiest way to show that. Well, let's see if there's nothing there. There it is. Right, so that's the system tray where normally on your device you would see how many bars of service, you would see battery On a normal device, you'd have the clock there, you'd see 3G, 2G, G, and so on. You have control over that, and so you should take advantage of that. Some applications you may want to hide that. So for instance, in a game, you probably don't want to see the time and so on. It's distracting and you want the full screen, you want to be immersed in the game. Some applications, on the other hand, you actually might want to see the time and your 3G. And some applications, you may want to hide it and make it available in different areas, right? So you can do that dynamically, you can do it anywhere you want. You can show and hide it at any time. It's just one line of code. And you just turn it on or turn it off. So for instance, in IE, you notice I can't see the system tray, but if I click on the 3 bars, the system tray appears, right? So I've made it available for end users that want it. I want that full screen real estate for most things, but when the end user hits the 3 buttons, I can see that system tray. The other handy component is the application bar. And this is where you display buttons for tasks related to what's going on the screen. So if you remember, in my Bing application, for instance, I had 4 app bar buttons across the bottom of the screen. And that's the limit. You can only have 4 at any one time. And then below the app bar, you can actually have menu items. And so we'll see how that works in a couple of minutes. But it's pretty trivial. It makes for, basically eliminates in many cases the requirement for a menu. It's just an easy way to give the user the ability to act on whatever they're looking at on the screen. Yeah, so some tips here. Use the app bar instead of creating your own menu system. It's just easier, and you'll find that, so here's an app bar with 3 buttons. Users, because it's part of the native experience, will just intuitively know how to take advantage of those. You can have up to 4 buttons, and then below the buttons, there's also menu if you want. If you tap, you just saw me do it on the IE one, where you tap the 3 buttons and then the menu items appear. You don't feel like you have to fill all 4 buttons. Some people feel that way, but you don't have to. And you can swipe up or just hit the 3 buttons to bring it up. The one thing that you will note is that the buttons will get colorized depending on what happens. They will also get rotated. If you're in landscape mode, there's animations. So when you switch into landscape mode, you'll see the app bar buttons automatically animate for you. That's just taken care of automatically. You don't have to do anything. This is the XAML for an application bar. Can you guys see that in the back? You can't. Let's look at it in code. We'll come back to it and we'll look at it in code. So I guess I just talked about this. So when you rotate into landscape, it rotates for you. And also when you think the menu, if you remember, were this way, when you're in landscape mode, it basically allows you to do it the way that you can actually read it, which kind of makes sense. But that's automatic. You don't have to do anything to take advantage of that. Page navigation is kind of important. By page navigation, I mean how do you move from one page to another and back again. And there are, well, let's talk about the frame and the page and what's involved there. You do have a frame, a page, and a content area, and you've seen some of this already. You haven't seen the frame yet, but the page, it was there, you just haven't seen it yet. You have the page control, which we saw earlier, the phone application page, and then the content area, which was where we had the buttons and the text boxes and so on. That's kind of just handled for you as part of Silverlight. There's some native things that you need to do to make your applications look and behave like first-party applications, but it's pretty straightforward. If you follow some pretty simple rules around alignment and number of pixels on the left and margins and all that stuff, your applications can look just like the Windows Phone applications. And we've defined all that. It's very easy for you to take advantage of that. We have guidelines that we've documented so your applications can mimic ours. We want you to mimic ours. The page pretty much fills the entire area of the frame. You don't actually see the frame. And they all derive from phone application page. They all contain a title, and there's a surface there for an application bar if you want. So the way that you navigate is using a page-based navigation model, very much like the web, where you give it a URI, and then you fire and you forget, right? Because it's kind of stateless. It just sort of happens. The page goes off, and then you don't know when it's coming back until it comes back. So you don't have any state. It's not modal or anything like that. It's pretty straightforward. You basically new up a URI, right? So in this case, I'm newing up a URI that says, I guess you can't see this in the back either, right? Can you see it in the back? You can? Okay. So here I'm newing up a URI called /secondpage.xaml. And so it means it's looking from the root of my application to something called secondpage.xaml. It's making it relative or absolute. And then I'm going to pass that to navigationservice.navigate. And that's it. I don't have to do anything else. Silverlight and the Windows Phone platform will take care of everything that needs to happen to make sure that that page launches and appears and does all of the good stuff. You can provide the ability for the second page to navigate back to the main page, but it's kind of redundant because every device has a back button, and by default, when you hit the back button, it's just going to do it back, right? And so here, remember we used the navigation service.navigate to get to my second page. There's a navigation service.go back, which basically goes back. And so Windows Phone, the platform, is basically keeping a stack of all the pages that the end user has gone through in your application. And as you hit the back button, you're kind of going through that stack. And so you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It just kind of happens for you. Now, of course, the downside of that is that you really don't want to have an application that's too deep, right? Because otherwise your end user is going to have to hit that back button 100 times before they can exit. And so what they're going to do is just hit the start button and go to the start and then go and uninstall. Yes, do you have a question?
Can you catch the back button action?
So the question was, can you catch the back button action or event? And the answer is yes, you can. You have to be careful when you do that because there is a requirement that every application on its home page, if the end user hits the back button on the home page, you have to exit. If you don't exit, then your application will fail certification and you won't be able to publish in the marketplace. All right? But it can be handy. I would say use it very sparingly. The places where I would use it is if I needed to do something before the back button. And even there are other events that I would hook into to do that over using the back button. Yes?
Is it possible to control the page stack so that when you load a new page, instead of pushing it on the stack, basically just replace with some item on the stack?
So the question was, do I have any control, if I can paraphrase, do I have any control over the page stack? You do up to a certain level. You can pop things off the stack. I don't think you can pop stuff onto the stack. That happens automatically for you, but you can pop stuff off the stack. Again, use it sparingly because you don't want the navigation to be confusing to the end user. If they hit the back button and they expect to see a page and then they see something else, that's going to be confusing for them.
But you might have an actual use case where you have,
right.
say,
that's where I was going. Yeah. So there are some scenarios where that does make sense. For instance, if I have a shopping cart application where the end user is stepping through a shopping cart and at the end they've paid, you don't want them to step back through that shopping cart. That transaction's done. And so you want to pop through that so that they don't have that opportunity to do that, right? Because you get into some weird situations. Unless you want people to pay for your products twice. Yeah, might be good actually, I don't know. Yeah, so again here that go back is there for you. There are some scenarios where it can be handy, but for the most part, you don't have to do anything. Just rely on the back button. Yes?
Can you put a parameter in the go back, so you say go back to?
Right, so the question was, can you put some parameters in the go back button that says go back to? The answer is no. There is no parameter. It's just two brackets. You can, depending on what you want to do, you can, when the go back transaction or the go back event happens on that page, you can say, oh, the end user is coming back. I'm going to pop myself off the stack and keep going. So that's the way you would sort of do it. But again, be careful when you do that. You don't want to confuse the end user. You want to keep it consistent and you want it to make sense when they do that. Any other questions? Page navigation is really important, and a lot of people mess it up. So it does lead to some weird transactions where, for instance, if instead of doing a go back, right, imagine a scenario where I'm on the main page, I navigate to second page, and then I hit this navigate back. Instead of using the go back, I use the navigate, right? And I say navigate to first page. It looks like I've come back to the first page, but reality, what I have in my stack is page 1, page 2, and now page 1 again. And so if I hit the back button, I go to page 2 and then page 1. It gets really confusing. And so again, pay special attention. It's one of the things you should be testing before you publish, is make sure your page navigation makes sense. Is this boring? Interesting? Is this new? I'm having trouble reading the room here.
Maybe it's a bit trivial.
This is too trivial?
Just a bit.
Just a bit?
In my opinion, sorry.
Anybody else finding this trivial? Anybody not finding this trivial? Okay, there's some people that find this interesting, so nah. It's not that bad. Bear with me. When we get into fast application switching, it's going to be a lot more interesting. Where was I going now? Oh, yeah. So let's just do this quickly. Which one do I want? Okay, so just for those who couldn't see it earlier, so here is my app bar. Can you see this in the back now? You guys in the back, can you see the app bar? No? Really? You can't read this text? Really? Wow. Okay. You should have said something. So you guys have been sitting there all day reading a book? Is that what? Okay, let me just go a little higher. I'm already at 20 points, so I don't know, maybe 24. Wow.
You can use the control scroll.
I can use the zoom also, yeah. Here, is this better? Not much? I may need to get you some binoculars. It's the contrast? Oh. Yeah, I don't really have control over that. Email me if you want to see this code, and I'll email you the code. And explain it to you if you want over email. So this is the application bar. Again, it's the application bar, the phone application page dot application bar, and then within that you have a container for the application bar, and then for. Was there a question? So within that, there's application bar icon button. And so in this case, there are 3 icon buttons for the 3 events that we see, or the 3 actions that we see here. Each one of them has a URI pointing to an image, as well as a name, and some text. And the text is the text that will appear underneath it. When you swipe up, even if there's no menu, swipe up, the icon, the app bar will move up just a little bit just to show you text. So sometimes it's not enough to just show an icon, especially when you're first using an application. You want to know what some of the icons actually mean. And then what was the other thing we saw? Oh, one of the other things I wanted to show for those of you that haven't done it is expression blend. How many people have already seen expression blend before? Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, so this is going to be boring for you. I apologize. Just read a book while you're waiting. Yes?
Is there a reason why expression blend hasn't been integrated with Visual Studio? Because I don't know what's happened lately, but some time ago I started looking at Silverlight, and I was quite annoyed that I had to use both Visual Studio and Expression Blend in 2 different environments.
Yeah. So the question was, is there a reason why Expression Blend is not totally integrated into Visual Studio? And the reason is pretty simple. It really has a different target in mind for who should be using Expression Blend, or who the primary user of Expression Blend is. And you can tell it's black, right? It must be for a designer, right? So this is really designed for designers, and it's built for a designer to be building or compositing different applications.
But I was just thinking, when I started building my Silverlight application,
It's much easier.
I needed some controls,
Yep.
which was way easier to do in Expression Blend, just to build it up from scratch
Yep.
instead of hard coding it in the hand.
Absolutely. And so just to repeat that for those of you in the back of the room, it is much easier to do some things in Expression Blend than it is to do in Visual Studio. In fact, it's possible to do some things in Expression Blend that are not possible to do in Visual Studio. One example is animations. Expression Blend is really easy to do animations. Now, I'm not going to do it today, but it's actually basically you design a timeline and you can drop different things on your timeline, and Expression Blend just builds the animation for you. It's real magic. That sort of thing just doesn't work in Visual Studio. The way you do it in Visual Studio is it's all text. There's just nothing in the Visual Studio Designer that allows you to build animations. Another thing is choosing icons for an app bar. Visual Studio doesn't support that right now. Expression Blend does. So again, it's more of a design tool. It's just not something that the two will never integrate together. Now, you may find that some of the features or functionality or capability that you see in Expression Blend, some of that may start to migrate to Visual Studio, but the two products will always be separate because there are 2 different targets there. One is for the designer, one is for the developer. Does that answer your question? Again, I just wanted to show this quickly. And so you see here that I right-clicked on that page, the main page.xaml page in Visual Studio, and I said, open this page in Expression Blend, and it just went ahead and did that. And you can see, as I mentioned earlier, I was kind of joking, it's black because it's for a designer, but it really is designed to look like other design type apps. If you think of things like Photoshop and other Adobe type apps, they sort of have that look and behave in that way, and that's what designers expect. You see here I have my solution. It's the exact same solution of the one I'm looking at in Visual Studio. It's not a copy, it's the exact same solution. And the beauty here is that as a designer or as a team, the designer and the developer can be working on the exact same code, on the exact same solution. When the designer makes a change or commits a change to the version control, that change goes directly in and the developer sees it next time they build. Vice versa. If the developer provides a new service that the designer needs to get access to, the designer just sees it automatically in Expression Blend. So it's just really easy to work and to have that much tighter integration between developer and designer. We also have things like objects and timelines. Again, I don't have a lot of time, but if you look at some of these things, you can see that here I have this sort of hierarchy of objects that I have on my screen. And so here's my buttons, right? So as I click on them, logos, and so on, I can even play with the application bar, right? And if I add that, I can change the icon. Let me just change, I'll just add the plus icon there instead. So I made a change there. So rather than use the dig icon, I'm going to use a plus sign for dig. Not appropriate, but that's just for fun. And now when we run this, let me just close and save. Save. When I come back to Visual Studio has now detected, hey, something's happened outside of Visual Studio to the same project that we're working on right now. Do you want me to load that? And if I say yes, reload, it's now reloaded that page. And if we now run this, actually, what was the other thing? Oh, we want to look at, so the navigation. Oh, it's not running, I guess. So you see that plus sign there. The other thing, we talked about this earlier, I guess it's pretty straightforward, but here's that navigate.uri, right? And in this case, rather than looking for /digpage.xaml, it's in a folder called views, and so it's just an easy way to navigate. It's pretty straightforward stuff. It's kind of important. Like I say, page navigation, app bar, it's very basic stuff that you will use in your applications all the time, and they need to work well in order for your applications to behave and look like native apps. Any questions? I'm kind of going through this a little quick, so please, if I'm going too fast, please let me know. Okay. So that's sort of it for Silverlight. We talked about some of the things that Silverlight is really good at, the design behind Silverlight. We talked about some of the templates, how to create multiple pages and navigate between them. We talked about the back button and URI navigation. There's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about, and I sort of alluded to it earlier because someone asked. Silverlight Toolkit for Windows Phone. Silverlight.codeplex.com. Really handy, really great code. If you're doing any Windows Phone applications, you really deserve to give yourself a break and take advantage of this really good code. This is developed primarily by one person on the Windows Phone team, Jeff Wilcox, really smart guy. And he does revisions all the time, like every 3 to 6 months there's a new revision, and he adds stuff, fixes stuff. And you get full access to the source code. So not only is it great code that you can use in your apps, but it's great code that you can use to learn how to do your own components and so on. So, and one of them, I think someone was asking about charting, right? Was around here? Yeah, so there is some charting controls right in there that are free. Now, of course, there's also third-party controls available as well, and there's some really great ones, but this is a good one to get started. And then the other one is NuGet. NuGet is actually really handy. I would strongly encourage you to use NuGet. And NuGet basically is package management for .NET. You install it, and then in your Visual Studio, it allows you to manage all of the different things. So for instance, if I install NuGet, then I can just go and type Silverlight, and it will show me the Silverlight toolkit right within Visual Studio. I don't have to go to CodePlex or anything. I can just say install it. It will go to CodePlex, download it, install it, integrate it into my application, and add the references to it in my application. So I don't have to do anything, which is great. And then when there's an update to Silverlight Toolkit for Windows, it will actually offer to update it for you. Really, really handy. So I strongly encourage you to download and install it and play with it. Yes?
Do you need Pro or higher?
Oh, that's a good point. Yes, thank you. So the gentleman points out that you do need Silverlight Professional to use NuGet.
Yes.
What did I say?
Silverlight.
Oh, no, not Silverlight. Visual Studio Professional. Thank you. There is no Silverlight Professional. Sorry. Thanks for keeping me on my toes. Any questions on Silverlight? I'm going to stop there. We actually went through it a little bit faster because I think some people are more advanced than I expected in the room, but that's okay. Any questions, comments, concerns? Yep.
Do you have anything about unit tests?
So the question was, is there anything related to unit tests on Windows Phone? And there is no special unit testing. I mean, there are unit test frameworks and so on, but nothing specific to Windows Phone. Any other questions?